Good afternoon and welcome. We thank you on behalf of HIUG and Appsian joining us for the webinar today, How Beth Israel Medical Center Balances Data Security and Productivity. You will be able to ask any questions in the questions section of the control panel on the right side of the screen. We will probably hold those questions and answering them to the end of the broadcast today. The presentation is being recorded, and we will make sure to send out the recording to everybody here on this call within a couple hours once we're finished. So today we are joined by a special guest, Bennett Walker, who is the manager of PeopleSoft applications at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, and Greg Wendt, who is the executive director of security solutions at Appsian. So to go ahead and kick things off, I think I will go ahead and pass it to Bennett. Take it away.
All right, thank you. So I'm just going to dig right in. So thank you and welcome. Thanks for joining in. I look forward to reading any questions you have, and so put those in along the way, and we'll get to them at the end. So and off we go. So as mentioned already, we're the presenters. So I will jump through and just talk a little bit about Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. We are a world-class teaching hospital of Harvard Medical School, and just a couple of light statistics just about how big we are. So 673 licensed beds, and one of the favorite things is 5,000 births per year. This is based on 2017 data, but a little side note, I had both of my sons were born at Beth Israel, so it's a very special place, not only for work, but for personally and family-wise, so just throw that in there. We are recently, last year, part of now the Beth Israel Lahey Health system, so we are here right in the middle with Lahey, and as the name says, it's a large conglomerate of all of us, so we're happy to be part of the Beth Israel Lahey Health family. So as recommended, I'm just going to talk about our versions so people know where we are. So in HCM, we are currently in PUM 26 with some selective adoption of new PUM elements. And we've got also People Tools 85606, just for reference. And we are on Oracle 19C. Similarly, in financials, we are on PUM 21 and the same version of Tools and Oracle. That will come in handy to know in just a minute here when I talk about what we're going to be talking about today. So what really prompted all of this and got us all started is finding out what these security issues that had happened a few years ago that led us to really seek out a security solution. So we will talk about the options that we found and what the availability was, and then talk a bit about Appsian's security platform and the functions, and then talk about the upgrade process, lessons learned, and some future uses. So starting off, the first thing is those security issues. So the issues that led us to really need this. So this was really, it's disappointing to say that we were pushed into this by something that had happened. It would have been nice if we had proactively gone out, but that's usually not how it goes. And so what happened a few years ago, and I'll just keep it at a very high level, but there were some direct deposit changes made for 3 different employees. And it was through a social engineering hack. Somebody had gotten usernames and passwords, logged in, and actually changed those direct deposit accounts for those 3 employees. We were lucky because we have a phenomenal payroll department that caught these at the pre-note on the pre-note reports. And that's because those 3 direct deposit changes for 3 different employees all pointed to the same routing number and account, which pulled up red flags and said, we realized somebody had gone in there and actually made these changes. Also, we were fortunate the employees themselves, because the change was made in a way that would cause a paper check to go to them. One of the employees actually reported that they were getting a paper check for some reason. So in looking into it, we could tell that these direct deposit changes were not made by the employee. So we caught it before there were any issues in terms of where the money went. But this really triggered us to say, wow, there's a security issue. We need to figure something out. So we started digging in and talking in the institution, and we realized that one other area that we are completely susceptible to is the over-the-shoulder attacks. So This is oftentimes talked about when we're talking about these shared workstations out on the floors when you have a lot of the staff who are working in public areas. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier that my sons were born at Beth Israel. Well, my wife was a nurse at Beth Israel for 8 years. And one of the things she said was that she would log into PeopleSoft on a shared workstation and there would be a code blue and she would have to leave her workstation without being able to exit and close out, which meant somebody could have come in and absolutely made changes and made updates, viewed data. So that was another driving factor to say, wait a second, we've got a security concern here with people being able to do things inside of the system. So we wanted to make sure that we were addressing that as well, because even though we didn't have any reported issues, who's going to say that oh yeah, somebody saw my social security number by clicking through, and how would they know that? Because by the time they got back to their workstation, they had been timed out or it had been closed or somebody else was there. So we had this set of issues at the top level and we said, well, what are some of the tools and what can we do about this? So we started digging in and started looking to see what was out there. And we started with the delivered options. So delivered field masking, which is now available in PUM 33 in HCM and in future releases for financials and campus solutions. And you have to be on 857. The first thing was when we actually signed with Appsian. This was when we were doing this 2 years ago. These features were not available. So that was the first part. And since they have become available, there are reasons, for those who know Jim Marion and the PeopleSoft IO podcast, they actually talk about some of the differences about how the robustness of the PeopleSoft delivered field masking isn't quite to the same level because of where it sits in the system. External access, so we're talking about that access from outside of the organization and also outside of the country. Well, those are items that from a delivered option there really isn't anything, so we could go to networking and have them either block all access or allow all access. You can't go granularly within the application. The multi-factor controls, this is going to be part of that not over the shoulder attack, but the shared workstation departure when somebody has to run off to a code. These are highly complex, but you can actually custom build them. It was recommended against to do this, but if you look out there, there's a blog post about somebody who actually built in PeopleTools, in PeopleCode, their own multi-factor control. And while that sounded like a wonderful thing because it is a $0 outlay, it really isn't because of the amount of time. I believe that person took about 4 or 5 months to get it going. And of course, once it's live, now you still have to maintain it. And that is a complete custom piece of code. So we wanted to stay away from that if possible. And then activity logging, we had actually looked into some event mapping and using PeopleCode to log online behavior. And it just, the logging that PeopleSoft provides just isn't as granular and isn't as comprehensive. So we just found that the delivered options were a little bit lacking. So we went out and looked, and there were a bunch of solutions that we looked at, but two of the ones that I wanted to talk about were, of course, the Appsian security platform, which is provided by Appsian, and it resides on the web server, and it doesn't actually affect the data. It's pulling it, as Greg will mention, talk about a little bit later. It actually sits there on the web server and transforms things after they're coming out of PeopleSoft. So it gives that robustness to make sure that nothing gets out to the actual workstation itself. The tools have many other features other than data masking, but data masking is a part of that. And then there are additional tweaks within that allow for click to view and specific logging. One of the other options is called the data masking factory. It's provided by BTRG. You can do data masking for non-production environments, but data masking is the only tool that is a part of that data masking factory. And the masking at the database prevents the direct access. So that is a benefit that Appsian doesn't provide, which is your DBAs and folks that have direct two-tier access to the database itself, or actually direct access to the database, but that's not really what we were concerned about here because our database connections are really only to less than 10 users. So there wasn't really a concern at that point. So we decided 2 years ago to go with Appsian. We selected Appsian, and so in that selection process, we actually decided to go with masking of personally identifiable information was one of the features that we decided to license, along with click to view and page activity logs. We wanted to block that external access, so we have external access blocking, and then finally putting in multi-factor controls within the application itself. And with that in mind, I will turn it over to Greg to talk a little bit about Appsian.
Perfect, thanks, Bennett. So when we talk about Appsian, obviously we've got a couple of different solutions. We now are actually have an application security platform inside of the SAP platform as well, as we're continuing development. But when we talk specifically about the ones that we're working with inside of PeopleSoft, it really is about giving you the ability, I mean, Bennett's been talking about it, of adaptive access controls. It allows you to make decisions. He kind of made a point as to field masking. It's a big issue when it comes to field masking and being able to decide how, when, what, where you really want to be able to access that data, be able to implement a multi-factor authentication, for example. So many of our customers have come to us for many different reasons. This is a complete solution. So nowadays, we've had a lot of people in the last 3 months that have really been looking for secure remote access. Obviously, the reasons for that are COVID and all of a sudden everybody working from home. So when you think about the scope in how access to your system has changed, typically a lot of organizations were lucky if they provided self-service outside of their firewalls. Now all of a sudden you're not only talking about self-service, but you're talking about remote, high privileged access of payroll, benefits, all of these scenarios. And that's one of the reasons why we've seen a major uptick in phishing attacks, spear phishing attacks directly around, because the landscape has changed so much so quickly that a lot of these organizations were challenged with implementing that remote access in a very secure manner. And Bennett talked about it too, specifically with data leakage. Data leakage can happen in many ways. I've seen it being an enterprise architect for as many years as I did. One of the most common ways was actually a developer working with a functional lead and taking a screenshot of something and emailing it back and forth. Well, it was in a dev system. Sure, that's great, but it had sensitive data on it. It had PII on it. So now all of a sudden that's in the email, it's in the pictures, they didn't black it out, all sorts of things like that. It's by accident. People don't do it on purpose. They do it to attempt to get their job done. That's the main goal that you want to implement with security, is effective security without inhibiting how they need to be able to do their job. And then we've also got on the back end real-time visibility and analytics that we'll talk about with a little bit of a demo later. So let's talk a little bit more about those gaps in the PeopleSoft security model. So when you think about the transactional level data security, when you have that lack of multi-factor authentication at the data level or at that transactional level or the field level, I mean, it gives you the ability to decide when and where you want that. From an implementation perspective, we've had customers that have implemented that across the board, very targeted. Nowadays the problem is, think about it from a cost perspective. That has to be thought about as well. If all of a sudden you have 20, 30,000 people that are forced to do multi-factor all of the time, you're going to increase your carrying costs. Whereas if you can do that multi-factor at a very field level targeted multi-factor, you may cut that in half, maybe a third. So there's all sorts of different reasons why you might want to implement that at a data level or a field level rather than system wide. So the other side about it is too, PeopleSoft was designed in a way that once everybody knows, once you have the permission lists and the roles, you're going to be able to access what you can access regardless of where you're accessing it from. And that's a real limitation because a lot of times when you poke a hole in the firewall and you set up this site, all of these things are going to be publicly accessible now. You've got to put in a lot of extra controls. I was talking to somebody the other day and they were talking about how difficult it is to try to put in wildcarding on their load balancers or on their external firewall. It's all kind of a guess. They're like, every time we thought we had it, nope, more pages were visible and all of this other type of stuff. It's because it's a metadata driven application. So it becomes very difficult when you're talking about, external controls to try to implement the controls at that finite contextual level inside of the application. When we talk more about some of the data masking, so if we can, perfect. Some of the data masking controls, this is something, Bennett talked about it a little bit. Obviously PeopleSoft is delivering more of those, but it's something that there is an architectural difference between ours and theirs. We can also embed a multi-factor authentication. The nice part about it is there's no customizations to how we do our data masking. You can do it on any field, on any page, and there's multiple reasons as to why you would want to do that. It's one of the things that we get into. Our click to view specifically allows you to track and log when somebody's accessing data, so you don't have that false positive. You're able to see what type of data access they're getting into. We've had customers asking for this for years, which is why we built it, because from the auditor's perspective, they want to be able to see and answer those questions. So being able to really build that data masking the way you want to around your business processes and really your policies is what the end goal is there. And being able to do that variable depending upon where somebody's coming from. So if they're coming in from off of the network, well, I suggest you mask. And if you're layering in the correct masking, then maybe you don't have to do multi-factor in so many different places because you can protect the data. It's not going to be seen. So there's a lot of ways that you can layer these controls together in a way that makes it very effective and cost effective to help you, decrease the costs and the carrying costs of not only maybe multi-factor identity management, all of those types of things. The other side too that we hear a lot about is logging and understanding what's going on. And I think probably the best example of this is, I'm going to give an example of when I was at a conference. Yes, and I know all the conferences have been canceled, or that's why Bennett and I aren't standing in front of you doing this right now. But it was actually one of the conferences, and I asked just a simple question about a phishing attack. How long does it take the security people to respond to a phishing attack or to figure out what happened was really the question. Because from an end user's perspective, they're going to just get their password reset, they're going to get their credentials back, and they're going to be able to go about their day. But now when you're talking about, what happened, what was viewed, what was done, all of that still has to occur on the back end, that end user's not having to deal with it. And talking to some of the people in the room, it took them anywhere from 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 weeks per account per phishing attack to make sure that no data was viewed, that nothing was accessed outside of the realm, that now they have a leak and they need to report on it, or they need to put credit monitoring on somebody, or they need to put something into effect. So when you're talking about that full incident response, understanding what people are doing inside of your application, you definitely have to have that stepped up logging. And that's really where the entire platform comes in. So if you think about our security platform, Bennett talked about it earlier, it is an entire platform. There are multiple use cases, multiple features. It's not something that you have to take off, and bite the entire apple. We have a lot of customers that are going to implement certain parts of it. Maybe it's about multi-factor authentication, maybe it's about single sign-on. So all of this is actually configurable. And as Bennett talked about, from an architectural perspective, we plug into the PeopleSoft system. We're a plug-in to the web server, and there's a project that gets loaded into App Designer. So you're configuring and using real-time attributes inside of PeopleSoft, menus, components, pages, things like that, to decide how you want to be able to apply all of this security to somebody. So do I want to implement multi-factor? It's in real time. It's going to happen as they're working with that transaction. It's streamlined, it's efficient. It doesn't even, the end user has no idea we're there. So when you're talking about the access controls and making the decisions as to is the data masked or not masked, all in real time as the user's working with it. So it allows you to implement your business policies in a way without having to modify PeopleSoft. The projects are very quick to get up and running and installed and configured. And then on the back end, we're able to close that loop and basically complete that life cycle with giving you the understanding of what's happening, the insight into the access, what that user's touched, those types of things inside of the application. So some of the analytics that people are worried about now are really workforce management. And, now that my workforce is remote, how do I know that they're even doing what they're supposed to be doing? Are they working like they should? How can I judge this when I have no insight into the application? So there's a lot of reasons to be able to look at that data, because it's going to give you a lot of business knowledge as to what's happening inside of your system, far beyond just the security policies that we talk about on a daily basis. So with that, Bennett, I'll hand it back to you.
Oh, thank you, Greg. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start to talk about a little bit. I'm going to get a little bit into the weeds, just because when you start talking at a high level about what all these features and all of these different ways that you can do things, that's great. I love to hear about what is possible, but there's a big difference between possible and in place. And so that there's just a shift there. So I want to talk about how it's highly configurable is the way I think of it. Is it's the configuration can be so specific that you can really grab a whole bunch of different factors and take them into account. Is it external access? Do you have these roles? Is it this set of Opera IDs? Is it, a whole bunch of different things that you can pull in, and you can use multi-factor control, you can use masking, whichever option you want to take. There's also some simple options available. So we've got the whole gamut, and Appsian support definitely helps out when we have complex configurations, and it's been, again, it's been very enlightening to see all of that. So just to show, you're going to see a bunch of screenshots here and then a demo later, because I think that that's the best way to show this. So just right away, you can see this very simple option where you've got the activity log. So we're just logging all of the activities. So we log it as an activity log. We also log it as a Splunk file. So then we've got those options. We've also got some complex ones which have, the URL form parameters. We can have account number edits. We can make some changes there and have it be very specific to a specific field in a specific spot. So without going into too much detail on, again, high level, we'll start digging in. So the first place we put it, the first place we were putting for this is, again, the personally identifiable field masking on the employee social security number. So when you log in into employee self-service, you can display the whole social security number is displayed. But so for those who go on to change their W-4 in their PeopleSoft system, take a look. You'll see the social security number in plain text in the upper right. What we did is we created this rule, very simple rule for masking the national identifier, and we told it to do it in these certain components and to exclude certain things, and then to mask it with a condition of leaving the last 4 visible, because just like your online banking account or other high privileged website might have this information, again, it's gonna mask those first digits. So this one is not, nothing is too crazy about this because it's pretty straightforward, but the next one is actually the dependent social security number. So when people go in for their dependents, there's a lot of people who have parents, siblings, and children. All of those also are in employee self-service. So in this case, one of my dependents, you can see here with the social security number, also again being masked. And the difference is, compared again to some delivered field masking that's a little bit more complex, you come in here, you click to edit it. This is clicking the right button. The national ID is cleared. Now, for those who are technically inclined, you might realize that if you clear this with people code and then try and click cancel, you'll start to see some things about invalid values and whatnot because of that. Because Appsian sits on the web server, we don't get that. So that's a nice bonus there. So it gets cleared, you can't see it there, and after you save it, it's also hidden. This one is also under the BIDMC masking national ID rule. So that's a complex rule. It combines both of these. Direct deposit. This goes back to thinking about that hack that we had a few years ago, that social engineered hack. That meant that not only could this person update direct deposit information, but that means they saw that direct deposit information. And this one is specific for that over-the-shoulder surfing. So you can see the account numbers now are masked to the last 4, and that's how we've set it. And this gives us the ability to reduce the visibility. Somebody surfing over the shoulder, they don't get those account numbers. Routing numbers we left because those are just banks. Those are publicly available information, so we left that open. But the account number itself is masked. So when you go in to edit that account, this is another spot. So this is where you can kind of start to realize the complexity. You've got an account number here, then you've got the account number here, and then you're going to go ahead and edit it. Well, when you go to edit it, it clears it out. So again, you're not ever seeing the whole account number. So when we did the setup for that direct deposit, we had a whole lot of display options. So we could pick, if how much to show, how much to mask, when to mask, how often to mask. If we wanted to make it click to view, we decided against doing click to view or even multi-factor because we had heard some people had said that they actually would use PeopleSoft to log in and look at their own bank account information if they needed to put it in on a different website. And we realized we did not want to be in the business of showing that information. So we are hiding it, and you can't even click to view it if you've got the last 4 to verify. So we created some, you can see some of these BID are the Beth Israel specific conditions and actions, and then we've used the quote unquote delivered Appsian fields and component groups to make those changes as well. So one of the other things I talked about was that external access. So very concerned about not only people from outside of the country, but also outside of the campus, outside of our internal network. And we wanted to make sure that the access to personally identifiable information and sensitive information was not even available, because the folks that should have access to these things should have access internally and not have to be logging in from perhaps South Carolina or from Nevada or Europe. So yeah, here's the very simple example. We have an area for our pension folks. We have some custom pension reports. And so if you're inside the firewall, this is what you'll see. And if you're outside the firewall, this is what you'll see. So you can actually see the URL is the same, but in this case, it's just denying that access. This granularity is what is not available when you start to talk about what is delivered and what the delivered options are, because there's no granularity here. It's either blocking the access completely, or from external access, or allowing it completely. So based on, as Greg said, the roles and the permission lists that you've already got. And in this case, we put our IP addresses that are our internal ones. Here's some examples. So just setting it up, setting our internal addresses so that those are included in the group to be considered or excluded from the group, depending on if you're going to block access or allow access. So another big one is that multi-factor verification. So going back to where we talk about when we were, what Greg was saying earlier, is you can do, we have secure auth, and you can have secure auth actually put that multi-factor authentication on the front end right at login screen. But the problem with that is that doesn't help with those shared workstations, because now this person is logged in, they've 2-factor authenticated, they've been browsing around, and they've got a timeout limit, and now you've got full access. Again, it's the PeopleSoft concept of that security is the front door, which is very nice and solid, but once you're in, you're in. So we decided to put put that multi-factor verification at on our pay components. So people looking at the W-2 information or your W-4 information or your even paycheck information, all of that. And we've set we're discussing changing those reauthorization timeouts. You can change that. That's so that if somebody's been away from their workstation for a few minutes, or perhaps make them re-authenticate with multi-factor every minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, what have you. Again, those options, and I'll show this in a demo a little bit later as well. So without further ado, I'll jump right into the demo here. So bear with me as I flip over to, oops, out. So I've got our user acceptance testing. So I'm going to hop into our non-production environment just so I can make some changes. So you'll see, so the first thing I'm going to do, and just to show how quick and easy it is here, this is employee self-service. So all sorts of information. We want to be able to let people get to different things, their different plans, and look at different things and see the announcements. And we have some forms that you can fill out. But when it comes to pay, we want to make sure that you're actually authenticating. So I'm going to go ahead and push it. You can't see the screen on my phone, but I'm going to go ahead and approve this request. And we're going to pop in here, and you're going to see this same thing. So now you're in and you can browse around. Now what you'll notice is it's going to ask me very quickly to re-authenticate. And I've done this on purpose so that you can see how often you can do it. I turned it up very high. I think I have it at 15 seconds. So it goes really quickly, but I'll show you again. So this is that mask direct deposit. Again, it's going to clear it out. We can remove ones. We can go into the W2. Okay, we've got to re-authenticate because of that. So you can see very quickly that it's set so that it's a very high rechecking. I will actually pull up just to show where it is. So we're going to go here and we'll go into the configuration itself. And you can see here I have it set to the token expiring with a time quantity of 10 seconds. That's why it's so fast. But you can see here, one of the things I wanted to show, there's a lot of options. We can do different challenges. We can do different restrictions. We can have different expirations. So now I could turn this off and it would be, I could apply those changes really quick, but I just wanted to show those because again, that's really where the multi-factor comes in, because now I've been browsing around, and when I come back, of course, it's going to say, hey, you may have left your shared workstation. So now you're going to have to re-authenticate to make those changes. We've even talked about, we had originally talked about, should we put this, because we have the option, should we put this at the change portion? Should we do it inside of the direct deposit area? Should we do it outside of the direct deposit area? And we have we've put it on the entire pay component itself. So just showing how the that direct deposit or the multi-factor works from there. And so I will jump right back in here and talk about one of the other things that we added. I don't think I've seen any questions yet. So, okay. So in the activity logging side, we have app server logs that we've been using for years and looking at those, but those are not nearly as comprehensive as we would like. So we wanted to look and actually be very specific for two different things. One, we wanted to log all activity, but we also wanted to specifically have a file that was created for W2 year-end forms, because we wanted to know who was clicking on that year-end form, because that carries so much PII that it's really something we wanted to separately store itself, so that we would have full visibility into whoever made those, was able to view those things. So we can actually pull that log listing up. Here's that BIDMC year-end form access log, and here are a few examples that I just created yesterday, just to show. It shows your IP address and your username, as well as the time and and the date. So you can tell somebody accessed it, what IP address they were coming from, and when they do that. So that gives you that ability very quickly to see who did what and when, without having to try and review the app server logs and look at different, looking at all of those to try to find the same information. So the setup, again, this is pretty straightforward. So we just want to generate that year-end form. So we just said on the click to view page, when you click that URL, we want to go ahead and create that action of the year-end form access log. So it's I would consider this to be a very simple configuration. All the heavy lifting is done by Appsian, and so it's great. So at this point, I think I'm going to turn it back over, Greg, for some of the analytics after we created those logs, but what you can do with them. So do you want to take over?
Yep, I'll grab it real quick. Perfect, thanks. Yeah, what I wanted to do was show you a couple of different things real quick, and this is really grabbing in. Bennett's been talking about amount of data and the logs that we can generate, and really taking those ones that are specific for your organization. What's important for you? I've talked to some higher ed customers. They want to know specifically who updates or when updates happen to grade rosters, for example, which is totally different than Bennett's example of who's accessing W4 information. So all of those things can easily configured inside of the policy engine, as you saw with Bennett working with that. So it's definitely something that you can capture the information quickly and easily that's important for your organization. And then we can start reporting on that and providing that for you. What I wanted to show you, I'm going to back up here just a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and jump into like a PPI view. As Bennett talked about earlier, some of the information around the click to view, this is specific around somebody who's accessed information. So it allows you to track that event. So not only did they go to a certain page, but they actually did view a piece of information inside of that transaction. It becomes very difficult to figure that out. So there's multiple different ways we can look at that. We can look at it by the user ID, for example. We can look at it by the IP address. And you think, well, why would I want to look at by IP address? You go back to the scenario of I'm dealing with a phishing attack. I'm trying to figure out who's looked at accounts, for example. We figured out they set it to all 3 different accounts, like the example Bennett was talking about. Let's figure out what was viewed by that IP address. So there's all sorts of different reasons that you want to be able to track IP address. When we talk about this from other ERP systems, they've been wanting to do this for offboarding. What did somebody look at when the last 30 days when they left the organization, for example? And then also, what are the keys? So this is coming in and allowing you to see the key. So we don't want to populate that sensitive information. So what we're going to do is let you know as an organization, all right, this was the employee who was viewed. An employee ID is generic information. It's nothing sensitive. So from that perspective, we're not propagating that sensitive information, but it allows you to be able to track. So you can build that around any particular piece of data that you want to build that around, or who's viewed it, who's accessed it. So we can also do a quick geo map of that. So it allows you to see where that data may have been accessed from. So now when you're talking about, maybe COVID or remote access to your system, you might want to investigate certain areas of the world differently than others, for example. If we go back to the dashboards, incident response is another challenge. Kind of talked about that earlier with phishing attacks. So what if I want to search, by an individual user ID? What did this user do in the system? Some of the things that we're doing is we enrich the data. So we're going to allow you to see pages that are important. So rather than looking through every page inside of PeopleSoft, for example, what page has sensitive data? What are the pages I should be concerned about? Are the business transactions that I should be concerned about? Let's start with those from an incident response, and then we can work our way backwards. All of the data is captured, but let's sort the important ones up front for us. Then we can look at who's accessed sensitive data or private data by certain times of the day, for example. We have started building some more information around usage and how the employees are actually using the data inside of the system. Wow, let me refresh this. Don't know why that's not loading due to the fact that I was just on that. So let me come into that a different way. Go this way. All right, I may have to skip that one because for some particular reason, it doesn't want to start that one. So let me just change the parameter. I'm not sure that it's going to pull up much because I haven't been in my demo system. So let me flip back to, so that one doesn't want to work at the moment. So that's what happens with live demos. So, all right, here we go. Now we're waiting for data. So let me give that one just a second as we're talking about this. But one of the things that it's going to do is it's going to allow me to see, rather than waiting on that though, I'm gonna flip over to user engagement and kind of look at something a different way. So, but what it does is it's really tracking how users are accessing the system, what they're doing with it, you know, what type of transactions are they doing, how many times are they doing specific transactions, those type of things. So we can view it a different way to where we can come in and see, you know, privileged user access, who's accessing data comparative to other users. This may be nice when you're talking about remote users. It might be nice when you're talking about you have multiple clerks. Who's accessing the most sensitive information? If you have anomalies where maybe 3 or 4, or maybe you have 10 who are doing basically the same job, but all of a sudden 1 out of those 10 happen to be viewing 3 to 4 to 5 times the amount of sensitive data that all the rest of them are, is that a training issue? Do you have a rogue user inside of the system? What, you know, now I know I need to go find out more information about what this user is doing and what's happening inside of the system. So a lot of these can give you alerts as to, you know, what type of devices people are using to access the system, whether it's a mobile, whether, you know, what type of user agent basically. So I can look at that user agent and then defer and figure out what type of device they're actually coming in and using the system with. So many of these things allow you to have more knowledge about what's going on inside of your system. So it makes it a lot easier from that perspective. I'm going to go back to the security one for a second. Nowadays, one of the things that's really important too is Bennett was talking about some of the rules that they built about around remote access. So I wanted to talk about downloading of sensitive data. So when we talk about downloading of sensitive data, we're actually able to, you know, we log that out when somebody actually has done an event. And what's going to happen is it's going to go ahead and pull that information out. Let me do last 7 days, see what we've got here. You know, coming out of the system, because we're going to generate those logs. So I'm going to sign into PeopleSoft real quick, and I wanted to show you a little bit of what we add into the configuration of PeopleSoft. So when we talk about the project that gets loaded in, I know Bennett showed you a couple of different screenshots, but we have a menu item, Appsian, that gets loaded in, and inside of there we've got a configuration for analytics. It allows you to build a setup and configuration of what you want certain things to be. So there's some overrides you can actually give the system as to things specific to your system. I want these things to be high privileged. I want to look at certain fields or certain pages. I want to be able to track this information. So there's some setup and controls that you have in place there. And then it's also, when we come in, some of those configurations, I'm going to show you, Bennett kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, but we're going to look at that activity log. One of the things that we're able to do is we actually pull open, and I think I'm getting blocked by a pop-up blocker. So let's do this. We'll do it the old-fashioned way. So if I look at the activity log, we've got about 85 different log tokens. So I love pop-up blockers, and I don't know why all of a sudden they come on every now and then. So I'm going to do a new window, and I am going to do my action. And I want to pull open this activity log. You can see here's some of the log tokens. So the information that you can grab out about a transaction are all really configurable and what's important to you. And that's some of this, you know, the configuration that Bennett was talking about from that perspective. So it allows you to decide what you want to grab about a transaction. And then we've got different configuration of how you want that file to be created. So Bennett kind of showed you example of in a comma separated file. He only had a couple of different fields in there. Obviously, depending upon what you want to grab, there's a lot of information that we can pull and build out into that particular scenario. So it allows you to configure what's important to you, track that information, and then that's going to be pushed over into the analytics to be able to generate and work with all of those different reports. So it becomes very specific to your organization, so you're not having to deal with a lot of false positives. I get that question quite often. Our logs are generated when that transaction or when somebody does something from that particular event, so it makes it a lot easier because it's a positive. Somebody did do this. You're not having to search through and say, well, maybe this did or didn't happen. No, we know this happened. The click to view, somebody did view information. So when you're talking about the detailed analytics, what the understanding, everything that's going on behind the scenes, it provides you a lot more data to be able to work with as an organization. And as I said, that's beyond just the security side. There's business knowledge going on here. There's performance information that can be garnered, all of those type of things to help keep your organization moving in the right direction. So with that, I'm going to give the share back to you there, Bennett.
Thank you, and I will go ahead and share my screen here. I've got to go show my screen. I think, can you see it there, Greg?
Yes, we
Yep,
can see your
we've
screen.
got it.
Okay, great. All right, so I just wanted to talk real briefly and take a couple minutes to talk about the lessons that we learned and some of the future uses. In particular, the upgrade process, the configuration, and the maintenance. Some of the technical items that I find, getting into the weeds a little bit again to just talk about how it works, so it's not so much of a high-level discussion, but actually does get into a little bit more of the specifics. So one of the things about our future uses that we've been talking about is adding additional access blocking, because we've found that the configuration is so flexible and dynamic in the fact that we can really start to say, okay, external access. All right, so we do not only that, but we could also say, if you don't have certain privileges, can we cut down roles? Can we do different? Should we be cutting back more? Should we be stopping people from downloading grids or using query from external locations? I will tell you, I tried to slip that one in to our non-production environments. I put query blocking from external access and found out very quickly that some of our users actually log in through our external access to actually do their job, and so that was turned back. So it's one of those things where we're learning. It's good to have the tools, and of course, when we got notified, as you saw that screenshot earlier that said email the technical support, we got the email, and within about 4 or 5 minutes, it was turned back on and let them do their job. Again, this was a non-production environment, and we were just rolling it out to see what type of user would be affected. So again, we want to make sure to do this in a controlled fashion, so we don't. Again, we're balancing productivity against security. The big concern that we've always got is, we have a few power users, particularly that have very, very high levels of access, and so the question becomes, how do we protect the system from their user ID being compromised? And again, this isn't something that I'm not trying to harp on specific individuals, but it's, again, if somebody uses a brute force attack, it doesn't matter who that person is. If their credentials are compromised, now we're talking about incredible levels of detail, and that's the big concern that we have. So we might add some additional access blocking. Some of the less sensitive data, but that is still something that we don't want to be completely visible. You think about that, we've talked about, and we haven't implemented, but we're talking about that over-the-shoulder attack, and we start to say, well, maybe the home address that you saw on the W4, maybe that should be click to view. People might want to click to view it to make sure that their address is correct. And at the same time, they don't want it to be shown to somebody who's just walking by who can look over their shoulder and say, oh, they live right down the street. That's interesting. So again, click to view. We wouldn't have to pull multi-factor because we're not as concerned about that data. It's just something that you would rather have not be shown for that over-shoulder attack. And as I mentioned, that query download blocking. So not only just running queries, but query downloading, being able to block that by the IP address or even more. That just happens to be one of the criteria that we've talked about. So, so that's obviously another place that we might utilize things. On the lessons learned side, I just wanted to talk about how much the configuration and the ability to do that is it's a little bit of a different language than PeopleSoft. So the Appsian support has been fantastic in walking us through and showing us all the different features and really giving us the tool set to build out what we want to build. So many of these things, that external access, we didn't involve Appsian support because it's so straightforward. Some of these multi-factor and having that within components and within navigation collections, that was something that we had Appsian support work with us on. So again, there are different levels of support, and the installation was in the first place on the web server is very straightforward. It's very streamlined. Our PeopleSoft admin was able to do that installation without a whole lot of support needed. We had on-call support, but we didn't end up using it because it was straightforward enough. So really, you know, some of those future uses and also how we got there and some of the things that we learned. So the last thing that I was going to show is I was going to show a quick demo of that external access because I think that it's really fascinating to see, and it's going to take me about a minute or two to do. So let's see here. What I'm going to pull up is I'm actually going to pull up in. So I'm in that test environment. I wanted to show you that if I go to our custom menu, you'll see here we have pension administration. And if I come in here and I say, oh, I want to run a report, that's this one. So I can pop in and here's that report. But if I actually take this same thing and give me 1 second, because I have to log in remotely so that I'm from the outside. So now I'm going to do go home. Give me 1 second. So now if I am in, so I'm logging in externally through our portal, and what you'll see here is it might look the same right here. So no, that's production. I didn't want to go there. I want to go into test system. Hold on a second. So one of the difficult things again is to actually find a way to simulate being on the outside. So that's the tough part here as I do that. So the great part is that the configuration can be so dynamic that we can actually, there we go. All right, so here is, I'm actually outside the network and there's inside the network, but if you remember, it actually does even more because what it's saying is, you'll notice if I pull up this menu in Navigator, you'll see pension administration is right here below occupational health. And if you come here, you'll see it has, I'm externally accessing, it doesn't even let me see the menu there. So it just, it eliminates that aspect, but you might say, oh, well, is that just eliminating the link? And the answer to that is if I come here and I say, show me the 1000 plus, should say, there's that report. Let's go ahead and sneak in. And there's that denial. So you've got HTML here. You can do all of this. Again, this is that setup to show that you've got the access inside, but on outside you're not going to see it. So you can make it so that it's not even visible to the outside world. So again, keeping things nice and clean so you don't even have to see the things that you can access. Again, that's giving us more flexibility and more configuration. And as I think I see a question, I don't know if this is, I'm going to jump to the question now because I see it there this is from Kim saying that can you log a specific user, and the example would be somebody with privileged access. So Greg, you can jump in, otherwise I'll answer my experience, but I think that would be a little bit more on the logging side.
Yeah, definitely. We can log a specific user. You can also, one of the conditions that you can look at is user ID or role. So you have that choice. Say if you have, sometimes from an audit perspective, you may want to track your PeopleSoft admins and maybe they use their shared account. So you want to use something like, all right, PS admin. So you want to track everything that PS admin does, you can easily do. Bennett's kind of walking through the configuration of that, right now. So it's real easy to do that, whether it's an end user, high privileged user, or somebody that you think may be a rogue user. But Bennett, your thoughts?
Yeah, so there are so many different rules that you can do for conditions. So it's here's that not admin. So you're saying if they're not an administrator, so you're blocking that external access. You're saying, oh, do they have one of these roles? You could also, so back to Kim's specific question, you had said, can you log a user? And yes, you can. So, and if we just pull up, whatever process, it doesn't really matter. What I can do, and it would probably take me, and I'm not going to do it right now because we're out of time, but you could create a new content group that says, okay, I want these high privileged users. We want to watch what they do. Then you actually have the action, instead of being block external, you could actually just say, well, I want to have that go ahead and log that information, and you can create a new log, and that new log actually is a very specific. So it would be one. That's if you want to do a file. If you want to push it into the analytics platform and do it there, you could do it there. But one of the things that we're seeing is that we can absolutely make things very, very, very granular, like I just said here, in these role users groups, and you can keep track of it with comments and include them in the group or exclude them from the group. So you could just, we don't really care about all the people who have this role because it doesn't matter. Because it's such a simple role, or we could say, well, no, we want to specifically log these different users. So hopefully that answers your question, Kim. And I think we're out of time. We have 1 minute left. So Scott, I don't know if you want to chime in with anything.
Actually, right when you said that, Bennett, another question just popped in, and I think it's probably for you. And that's, oh, did you scope custom code before talking to Appsian?
So the answer is, so I will say that we put development resources towards the custom development, probably about a little bit less than 20 hours, because we didn't want to spend too much, but we wanted to vet out the options. And we found that while everything, again, like I said at the beginning, everything is doable because you have as I come up to the top here, you have these options. We found that these all were possible. External access, not so much, but the other ones, they were possible, but they were so prohibitively costly in terms of time that it wasn't something that we were going to pursue. And we've realized with with the production support that our team provides, there was just no way that we would get this put in place in a timely fashion.
Okay, great. And not really seeing anything else. So you are good to go ahead and wrap up.
All right, excellent. Well, I think I'll leave that wrap up to you. I'll just bring up the last slide and say thank you all for attending. Hopefully you learned something. I shared probably information that I hope that you find interesting. For me, it was I like to get to the details so you can see some of the inner workings, so that if you're in a position where you're wondering, could it do these things, that you hopefully can figure out, okay, yeah, it really can, or how difficult is it, and how to get things going, and how we did it.
Great, thank you very much. And lastly, just want a quick reminder, we have recorded the presentation, so everybody should be receiving the recording here shortly. If you have any questions for Bennett, he has been kind enough to include his email address right there. And if you have any questions to Greg, you can send them directly to greg.wendt@appsian.com, or you can certainly email us at info@appsian.com as well. So with that, we thank you guys very much for being a part of the presentation today. Bennett, Greg, thank you guys for your time. And everybody else, we appreciate you, and we will speak to you again on the next Appsian webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.